This is medieval Middle Eastern ceramics, and this is the cultural background to the Middle East and stuff like that. So this is the Earth. Let's zoom in on the Middle East a bit. And you can see there's a lot of desert. There's a lot of water coming down here and a lot of not water coming down here because this is the tropics. Here we have the Nile coming down here. This is what water is Egypt. There would be no Egypt if it wasn't for the Nile because it would just be desert. The Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf, I think some people call it, Mediterranean, Black Sea, Caspian Sea. There's rainfall up here. You can see the slightly green bits. Some of this rain falls down here and comes down here on rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, the most well known, into what we often call Mesopotamia, land of the two rivers. And there's rainfall down here in what we call the Levant quite often. But the basic shape of this, with the oceans around it, is due to this large plate here, Afro-Arabian plate, slamming into the Eurasian plate, forming all these hills and everything, and then suddenly breaking up again to make the Red Sea. So, of course, what we're studying are the people that live there through their pottery. So this shows you the languages as they are at the moment. This is the Arabic over here. There's some Coptic in Egypt. At one stage it's sort of all been Coptic. It sort of shows you that languages are not people. Languages can move without a movement of people. Just possibly the leaders and people who govern societies can move and make everybody else change their language. Here's, as you can see, lots of Indo-European languages up here, Iranian and Kurdish, and Turkish languages as well, which had come in from Central Asia in medieval times. Quite a good example of how languages do not necessarily equate ethnicity. You can't do a DNA map yet, but you can see the Prime Minister or President, shall we say, of Turkmenistan doesn't look quite the same as the Prime Minister of Turkey. This is because the Turkish language went over with some people, and some of those people started running the country, and people converted to their religion, by this time Islam, and to their language in order to get ahead in life. Getting ahead in life is very important. So, what people believed in this part of the world, when you go back long enough, and we have really very little idea of what people believed, but they probably believed in things like spirit worlds and the idea that animals can help them. This is often called shamanism, and this is a grave. Is that called Halazon Tashtit from the late Natufian period, from 12,000 years ago, and this lady who had some physical challenges was buried with a whole bunch of things that people feel may be related to shamanistic practices. There's a boar's leg here, which may actually just be meat. Certainly all these tortoises are thought to be from a feast, but also a marten skull. Again, that could actually be the skin and just the head is inside the fleece. But then there's the bull tail. There's some sort of like flail of a bull tail, and the wing of an eagle. It's sort of getting into shamanistic things with wings of eagles, often thought around the world to be a way of reaching higher spiritual states. And also there's a foot. It probably wasn't just a foot someone cut off and threw in here. It may have also been some sort of totem that this lady used for doing her shamanistic business. So people like this would be very interested in high places. This is a place I have done a lot of research. This is Deir Marmuza in Syria, which is now a monastery, but it's probably been a sacred space for thousands of years. People in prehistory and up until the present have always been attracted by high places. A high place is closer to the sky, to your sky god or your thunder god or whoever else you're trying to get close to. And another place that people are attracted to are caves, and there's lots of caves here. There's a big cave actually behind this wall here, and you can see lots of other caves spread around. And these are also sort of as doorways to another world. So caves and high places, springs. There probably was a spring down here long ago when there was more water in the world, or this part of the world anyway. And trees. Trees are very important. This is Göbekli Tepe, which many of you may know as being an incredibly important prehistoric temple site, but it's down in the valley below a high place, and it's possible that this high place had been important long before they built the temple. Nowadays there's a tree there. I don't think this tree dates to the Neolithic, but this tree, which would be in a good place for a spiritually significant tree, is on top of a high place, is actually to this day thought of as being a lucky tree, and people go and make wishes and tie it to the tree. So at some stage, people start to think in the way of gods, whatever they thought that meant. I'm not sure I know what that means. I don't know if that's what these people thought when they made these plaster figures. People have been making figures for longer than this, quite a long time, but these are from our part of the world that we're looking at, so they're quite interesting. But certainly eventually people seem to start talking about deities in how we think of them to this day, and develop things called pantheons, which are like lots of gods. And it seems if you look at like Mesopotamia, and if you look at ancient Egypt, and to a certain extent also ancient Greece, these are a bunch of Greeks, pantheons, Greek, is that pantheons seem to build up as nations are built. When you have, say, a city-state that has, or a part of the country that has their deity, perhaps a sky god and a love goddess or something, or other goddess, and you need to create a political unit with another part of the country or another city, then you start saying, yes, I'm the more powerful of the partnership, so my god is the main god, so yours is a god of the sky, well mine's a god of thunder and the sky, so yours is like of rain maybe. And basically the world is divided up as the pantheon is built, while they still retain their regional affiliations. So pantheons get built, but then people started breaking the pantheons down again. This is a Neo-Assyrian seal from the 9th century BC, and this is their main god, Ashur. They were aware of other gods, but he was like the big god. He was the main god, and this is him in his godmobile. And here is a sacred tree. Sacred trees, carry on. Strange creatures with wings. So, getting up to the period that we're covering here, we're supposed to start more or less with Alexander. We have the Accommended Empire, which from 550 to 330 BC, more or less, became a very large part of the world, from Egypt and North Africa all the way to the Indus Valley. So, the Achaemenids had a god too. He was their main god, and this is him in his godmobile. You can see they've got the idea from the Assyrians, who had a godmobile too, ultimately derived from Egyptian sun worshipping motifs. And here's a very small tree of life, again flanked by felines with wings. So their deity is called Ahura Mazda, and he is a part of Zoroastrianism. This is an artist's concept of what Zoroaster looked like. Doesn't actually look very Persian. So this is founded by Zarathustra, who lived in the 9th, 10th century BC, and he wrote, supposedly, the Gathas, 17 hymns written in Old Avestan, an early Iranian language. And he talks about Ahura Mazda, the omniscient but not omnipotent, uncreated creator, and talks of the concept of Asha, truth, true speaking, which is opposed by Druj. And so you have this idea of having good and bad in the religion. And so basically Zoroastrianism is trying to make you be on the side of good, which will eventually defeat evil. Vahumana, the good mind, and true thinking. So you are admonished to have good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. All good stuff. And a later document, the Yashts, 21 hymns invoking a specific Zoroastrian divinity or concept. Not when you say divinity, it's more like, I could use the word archangel sort of thing, or angelic, rather than actual god, but rather than a divinity, but that sort of thing. So Zoroastrianism, and being the main religion of the Achaemenids, was quite widespread and very influential, incredibly influential on other religions, which we shall come to talk about. Buddhism may or may not be one of them. Buddhism, you're doing a course on Middle Eastern pottery, so you're wondering, what has Buddhism got to do with this? In fact, you'll probably think that a lot about this specific lecture, and I'm hoping there will be times during the rest of the course when you'll think, like some revelation, in fact, oh, so that's why he was talking about that in that lecture. So Buddhism started off in this part of the world. This is chap Siddhartha Gautama, was born in 563 or so in Lumbini province here, now in Nepal. In Bodh Gaya, so he had a long walk over to here, he attains enlightenment. And he first taught the Dharma, the way, at Sarnath, which is over here. And then he dies a bit later at Kushinagar, up here. So everything happens around here. But from there, Buddhism becomes very popular and covers all of this area and beyond as far away as Japan in this direction, very important part of the religion, and down into Indonesia. But also the eastern part of the Middle East. But what is particularly lasting is not necessarily the religion, but the symbolism. Things like having round things around your head, we often call them halos, comes from here. And certain ways of sitting here, advocated by the Buddha, is we see later on as ways of depicting people. This is like 1st century, 2nd century AD. This is 5th or 6th century CE. This is the same thing. I try not to worry too much about that sort of thing. These are often said to be Hellenized, being Greekified. And now you may be wondering what the Greeks doing out here. Well, that will become clear. Alexander the Great then defeats the Achaemenids. And so basically this entire very well run empire falls into his lap, and quite easy, he conquers. Not easily, but you know, it's quite easy to take over something than to build it, as the Achaemenids had done over hundreds of years. So he dies like quite soon. He's a young man when he dies after doing this, and his empire is taken over by his successors. There's a chap called Seleucus and a chap called Ptolemy and some other people who we don't worry about. But these guys basically are, and their people, their successors, are running this part of the world. The Seleucid Empire, kingdom, and the Ptolemaic Empire or kingdom are the political entities of our part of the world up until other things start happening, like the Parthians, which I'll get back to later. Often called the Diadochi. That doesn't bring us to Judaism, but let's just say it does. So, Judaism is based on the Torah Pentateuch, the 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These are the fundamental documents of the religion. Here's actually one of them. So, Judaism is mostly associated with this part of the world in its origins. It talks a lot about these cities. Jerusalem and Hebron in Judea, and Bethel, Shechem, and Samaria in the northern part, which altogether would be considered Israel, all being descended from the sons of Israel. So if there was a Moses, I'm not saying whether there was or wasn't at this stage, it's often thought to have been something like the 13th century, maybe. If there was a David, and I'm not saying whether there was or wasn't, he was probably somewhere around 1020 and 970, something like that, depending whether your chronology is sound or not. So, however, we start getting some real dates now. In 722, the northern part, which we shall call Israel for want of anything else at the moment, is destroyed by Assyria. I was just mentioning the Assyrians and their deity. Well, obviously, the Assyrians were much better at fighting, very effective empire, and they completely destroyed the northern part of the kingdom, and Israel is destroyed forever, or so they thought. What happened to the people is debatable. You may have heard of Samaritans, here's Samaria, who claimed descent from here, although the Judeans said no, they're all Assyrian settlers. Personally, I tend to be a believer on people staying where they are for the most part. There's a lot less movement of people and a lot more movement, I think, of leaders, of people who want to run things, they seem to move around a lot, and they bring their ideas and their weapons and their technology and their belief systems with them. So anyway, so then we have Judea remains, and you have King Josiah of Judea. And this is a very important time because, oh, hang on, just getting ahead of ourselves there. We have Deuteronomy is released. Josiah is probably when, during his reign, that most of the parts of the Bible that pre-existed at this stage were brought together. You would have had parts of the Bible which talk a lot about this part of the world. You have other parts of the Bible that talk about this part of the world, often calling God by completely different things and with different emphases, like who they related to. Like they're having trouble with the Philistines or having relations with the Canaanites. Very different, and some of it would have been oral traditions probably, but they started codifying it in this period probably. Well, they certainly were codifying this, right? And Deuteronomy was probably created at that time. And this is where I am told we get this call of faith, statement of faith for the Jewish people. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. So very monotheistic. But then the Babylonians come, successors of the Assyrian, running Mesopotamia, and destroy Judea. So that's it. They're done. But then they are rescued by Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great, the Accommended Emperor. And in 537 BC, he defeats the Babylonians. And the Achaemenids then are running this part of the world too. And Egypt, in fact, most of this part of the world. And so they are, for some reason, very nice people. Possibly because, their faith makes them want to do good things, for which see above. And what they do is send some of these exiles 140 years after they were dragged off to Babylon back. The prophets Ezra and Nehemiah are sent back to refound their religion in Jerusalem. Take their book, which they're probably rewriting at this in another major rewriting stage, and refounding Judea and its religion. And one of the things they did, of course, was suppress Asherah. They were quite proud of writing that down. They went around cutting down all the Asherahs, which makes you think they're at least made of wood, if in fact they're not in fact trees. And there's a very tree-like aspect to many of these figures. So probably for most of this time that Yahweh and his Asherah were like happily sitting next to each other, husband and wife, but then the priests in Jerusalem just decide, no, there is one God, just like they have in Mesopotamia. Oh, it's Alexander again. So Alexander, this is actually still talking about Judea, but so Alexander, there is this big thing here. All the way through history, this had been somewhere between where people around here, whether Mesopotamians or Anatolians and the Egyptians, would largely disagree about who was running the world. And so what would often happen to the people that live around here is they'd fall through the cracks and get away with things they probably wouldn't if they were like more in the heart of things. So that's actually what happened next. We have the Hasmanian Dynasty. And if you read any of the history of this from the Judean side, you'll find all the sources are in fact Judean. The Hellenistic, the Greek people, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, don't talk about this at all, which would assume it's so unimportant they don't care about it. However, it did matter a lot to the Judeans, and so they recorded it, possibly played it up a bit, and made it bigger than it really was at the time. But basically, over time, they slowly turned this part of the world into a greater Judea, including Idumea in the south and the Galilee in the north, which were places where Judeans had never lived before, and you'd have very different ideas coming from this part of the world. 76 BC. However, then you get Pompey. Pompey is the Roman general who then, being Roman, conquers his part of the world. And he comes in, he defeats the Seleucids, and installs Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, for 40 years, runs this as a client kingdom of the Romans. This is the Silk Road. This is really the Silk Road. This up here is really the Silk Road. And there's other routes around here which are like, you know, side streets. But this is the main Silk Road over this way. This is very important for the Middle East because the Middle East is at one end of it. And they care a lot about trade. People that have money, they want to make more money out of trade. So trading with China, with its silk and other commodities, was very good. And so they did a lot of that. So knowing a bit about China would be good. The Qin Dynasty, 221 to 206, not very long. This is the time of Shi Huangde, the first emperor. And he standardized language, writing, and axle length because he built roads. You need to have the same axle length if you're building roads. It's very important. And he built canals and, of course, the wall, or the first wall. Lots of people built the wall. They seemed to like the wall. It was a good idea. The walls were usually between all the people on the steppes who wanted to invade. So then, after basically founding this empire in lowland China, he died and was buried with his army of terracotta warriors. So that was succeeded by the Han Dynasty, which is one of my favorite dynasties, who were very interested in trade and the Silk Road. That's the only reason you'd want to come and have any control whatsoever over this bit, which is mostly desert. It's kind of misleading to say, oh yeah, they controlled the desert. What they controlled, to a certain extent, were the cities and the roads, because they wanted to make sure that the trade got through. So clearly it was advantageous to the Chinese as much as it was the people in the Middle East. So one of the things I like about the Han Dynasty is that they seem to be very good with horses and horse archery. Here you can see a classic Parthian shot, shooting backwards over the back of the horse. So after that, we have the Three Kingdoms and the Qin Dynasty, and China's basically lowland China, just fighting amongst themselves, which may make a very nice movie. I do love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies, but it's not very good for trade with the Middle East. So that's followed by the Tang Dynasty, who are very good about trade with the Middle East. We get a lot of Tang pottery in the Middle East, which may have come by boat or may have come by land. And the Tang was so keen on it, they actually like to make figures of people from the West, because this is not a Chinese man. He's got a big bushy beard and a big nose and a big moustache. This is what they would call a foreigner. So here we have a figure of a foreigner from the Middle East, or at least Central Asia, probably. So here's the Eastern Hemisphere in 200 BC. Here's the Han Dynasty. They don't have the middle bit here on this map. And here's the Seleucids. And here are Arabian tribes. And here is the Ptolemaic Empire. See, they call it an empire. And here's the Roman Republic, which we will come to annoy us later on. And here, the Parthians. Let's get a bit closer. Here are the Parthians. So, the Parthians were originally, it's thought, a nomadic people related to the Sarmatians and the Scythians. Probably, at least their leadership was an Indo-European language-speaking people, very much keen on horses and running around on horses and shooting people with their bows. And they start deciding they need to be running things instead of the Seleucids. They actually started before then, 470 BC, but this is their final re-establishment of independence from the Seleucids. And then a few years later, they actually capture the Seleucid Emperor Demetrius II Nicator, and basically spend the next 10 years conquering the Seleucid Empire, establishing their capital at Ctesiphon, or the winter capital. Their summer capital was up away from the heat of Iraq. And then become an empire and start running things, defeat the Romans a couple of times, but then they fall in 224 of the Common Era. That's the end of the Parthians. Very keen on horses. This is not a Parthian. That's just, I really like this picture. This is actually Scythian, and it's a woman. I don't hear much of Parthian women on horses. I wonder if they did or not. And here we have a door lintel, which I'm showing you because this seems to be something we see amongst Parthians, or the art at that time, is they like symmetry, which is something we see in Islamic art later on. Very different from the Hellenistic idea, where they didn't have so much symmetry going on. Or a bit, not like that much. Talking about the Hellenistic people, Ptolemies. So let's talk about the Ptolemies. Theda Bara, Elizabeth Taylor, and Lindsay Marshall, who I thought made a very good Cleopatra. This is the last Ptolemy, so we really don't need to talk about her much. So the Ptolemies were Greeks running Egypt for some hundreds of years, and they Hellenized, Greekified Egyptian religion. They were already moving towards emphasizing this trinity of Horus, Osiris, the emperor or pharaoh in this case, and Isis, the father, the son, and the mother. I almost said Holy Ghost. And so this trinity were very important in late Egyptian times, and this is something that they really got into and Hellenized. You can see they're very Hellenistic looking now, but this is still them, although they call them Harpocrates or Harpocrates, Serapis, and Isis. They obviously could handle Isis's name. Isis becomes incredibly important in her own right, as a mother goddess and a love goddess and just an all-round goddess type. This is also very late. They were making things like sculpture, all sorts of things, and using hieroglyphs way into the Roman period because people liked it. It was traditional. So this could even be Ptolemaic, but I don't know. And here we have a Roman emperor. Who's Horus? Hope you're all getting that. So let's talk a bit more about the Romans. So the Romans come into our part of the world. At the Battle of Thermopylae, yes, there was more than one. It was a pass. There were lots of battles going on there. In 191 BC, the Romans defeat the Seleucids. They don't take over Seleucids seem to take a while. It's probably helped by the Parthians, but then in 66 BC, Pompey the Great conquers a lot of Anatolia, Syria, and down into Jerusalem. Syria becomes a Roman province with its capital in Damascus. But also in 30 BC, Octavian annexes Egypt, so that's if the Ptolemies. That's the Emperor Augustus to you. So, we're in Syria. Syria, in those days, would include Lebanon. That part of the world would include, being Lebanon, Phoenicia. Phoenicia was the name that people from outside called it. They tend to think of themselves coming from the cities they were born in, like Sidon. This says it's from Syria, but it could be from Sidon. Sidon was an incredibly important glass production center. So we're talking about glazed pottery. Glass is also very important for understanding glazed ceramics, which we will be talking a lot about. So this becomes a part of the Roman world. Of course, this is actually much later. It's got a cross on it, 5th to 7th century. So back to Pompey, who installs Herod the Great, who rules as a client king for 40 years. He gets up to all sorts of building projects. The Second Temple in Jerusalem. And also Caesarea. Caesarea is here. Caesarea, you might notice that all the ports are actually owned by somebody else. And there's no ports along here because it's just all beach, basically. It's not a good place for boats to harbor. And so Herod had a harbor built out of stone. And so he could have a seaport of his own. Isn't that nice? Caesarea continued to be an important city, and we'll be talking about it later on. This is the temple that Herod built, the Second Temple as it's called. The first temple would be the Temple of Solomon, and our best description is actually of the Temple of Solomon, and we tend to assume that the Second Temple was based on that. These big stones are very typical of Herodian architecture, as it's called. So this is actually the first temple, but it's probably also what the Second Temple looked like. And one of the interesting things in here are the cherubim. Here are 2 cherubim. So if you think of cherubs as being little fat babies with wings, that's not what a cherub is. Cherubim is actually a dual term in Hebrew, I'm told, and it means 2 of them. There's always 2. There are cherubim and there are cherubim. There are 2 of them. And there's always 2. Just there are 2 were protecting the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and there are 2 protecting the Holy of Holies of the temple. There are cherubim all the way around here. So you can see these are bodies of lion, heads of humans, and eagle's wings. And so they're quite closely related to other creatures of this nature, human heads and animal bodies that you get throughout the Semitic world. Like the Assyrians would have their bull-bodied, winged, human-headed guardians, usually 1 on each side of a doorway. And so they're quite the thing in this part of the world. Also trees. Remember the tree of life? And possibly that's what the menorahs are as well. So this is one of our lines of evidence for understanding. There's not a lot of depiction preserved in ancient Judea or ancient Israel. But we do have their neighbors, and this is thought to possibly be the seal of Queen Jezebel. And here you can see a cherub, and here's like snakes. A lot of Egyptian iconography here. And here is the seal, another seal, with a flying snake. What a flying snake is, I may bring up again later on. So, let's go back. The Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant seems to be strongly influenced by that movie with Indiana Jones in it. And they seem to keep making them looking like that. Basically a box like this. But what it's often described as is a mercy seat. It's the throne of God. And these are Phoenician depictions of their God sitting on his throne. And the Ark of the Covenant is described as a throne, and it has 2 cherubim on it. And this is what we have flanking the throne of the God. And here we have Tree of Life light lamps. And there's the sun that's flying overhead. So the people in Jerusalem, of course, would not depict their God because they don't have a depiction of the God. They don't depict their God. But so what they have is an empty throne, probably in the temple in Tyre or Sidon or somewhere like that. They actually have their God sitting in their throne. But in Jerusalem, I think they just had the throne. And so in the Ark of the Covenant, they would have had supposedly fragments of, or the actual tablets that Moses brought down from on high, but they could easily go into the seat. So, Herod the Great was succeeded by one of his sons, Herod Antipas, who did not run the main thing. Judea was ruled by the Romans afterwards, or shortly afterwards. But he ran the Galilee. A couple of places I'm going to mention is Sepphoris, Nazareth, and Tiberius. Here's Tiberius. So this is basically a Roman city that they are building. As you can see, Antipas was very much in the pocket of the Romans, shall we say. And he built Roman cities for them. Here's another Roman city, Sepphoris. Although the people here would be Jewish, you see. But this is a very Roman place. This is a type of house, is often called a triclinium, based on, strangely enough, the 3 inclines, triclinium, you see, the benches where the Romans like to sit. And this is a statement of power. It's a statement of power. This person here is the person that owns this house. And it's very important for the Romans that the power of this person is seen. So you can see in a Roman house, you can be seen all this way. People would not have the nerve to come walking in here and up to you and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Because there'd be servants and slaves in the way that would stop you. But it's very important that you be seen. And you can be, and the people around you can be seen to be subsidiary to you. This goes against everything that the people in the Middle East believed in at the time. It was a very Roman idea, and it was everywhere, and was really quite offensive to the local people. Also, although this is probably a Jewish house, here is probably a goddess on the thing. So it's depicting people also not traditional. And of course lots of Roman lamps. So this town is probably less important at the time, part of the Galilee. It's not on the main road like Sepphoris was, and so it's not an important trade town. And there wasn't a lot of wealth, judging by what archaeology has done here. This is Nazareth, where that man Jesus came from. This is actually a painting of 1860, and this is all typical 19th century architecture. I love the little double arches you get on the Ottoman buildings. And here's a minaret, you see. But it would have looked pretty much like this 2,000 years ago, with probably lower buildings. But here is a 2,000-year-old building. This is from Bethsaida, also in the Galilee. This is the house of the fisherman. So he's quite a poor chap. If he was wealthier, he might have other wings. But this basic structure of house, it goes back in the Middle East, right back to Ubaid times, back to the Chalcolithic, thousands and thousands of years before, of having a central courtyard and having rooms around the courtyard, if not rooms, a wall. Because that's how they like to build their houses. Nice enclosed areas. Typically in the houses, like places like Ubaid and Ur, you would have a little ante-room where you come in and clean off, and you couldn't see where the wealth of the house was. And you could to a certain extent see how big the house was and how wealthy they were, but it's not like they're showing it off like they did in the Triclinium. So you can see how even the house architecture showed they were very different people. So of course, as a consequence of this, they revolted in 66 of the Common Era, or AD, at the Battle of Beth Horon here. The locals defeated a Roman army, and so a bigger Roman army came to beat them up. Vespasian and Titus, his son Titus, first pacify Galilee, and then pacify the coast, and then they're about to go on to Jerusalem. But then there's the Year of the Four Emperors. This is when there are four emperors. Nero is assassinated, replaced by, I think Galba was next, and then some other guy, and then he's replaced by Vespasian. And so Vespasian has to rush back to Rome to run things. But in 70 is the siege and destruction of Jerusalem. And in the next 2 years, they take Herodium and Masada out in the desert, a great fortress of Herod. And so this is a bit of a bloodbath. Here is the destruction. This is actually the temple wall here. This is on, I think, the south side, where parts of the building be knocked down and come down, and smash the floors here. This is a very dramatic painting, but you can see this is the destruction of the temple, and here are some angels rushing off with the Ark of the Covenant, which we don't seem to have any evidence that they found. The Romans found. However, they did loot the menorah or a menorah. Here they are, walking off with it, and here is the emperor, looking very imperial. So this was like a very bad time for the Judean people. About 500,000 people are thought to have been killed. 50 towns and 985 villages were razed because the Romans were really, really annoyed, and they killed a lot of people, and weren't very nice about doing it. This is actually one of the earliest depictions of the crucifixion, with Jesus and the two criminals. It sort of shows you that people were confused about how it worked. They seem to be nailed to a wall. But interestingly, during the sack of Jerusalem, the Romans were nailing people to the wall because they'd run out of wood, and for crosses or poles or whatever it is they were hanging them from at the time. And so they nailed them to the walls, and they got bored and started nailing them in unusual positions to amuse themselves. So this is basically to show you how incredibly unpleasant people can be. There is one bit of archaeological evidence of crucifixion. You can see someone's been nailed through the ankle. That's the heel bone. So now it's all officially run by the Romans. Here's Arabia Petraea. This is a bit later, after they've defeated the Nabateans as well, which I'll be mentioning a bit later on. So the Romans go around ruining the landscape with all these modern buildings with arches and things like this. You can see their brand is found everywhere across the Middle East from now on, and you can't avoid it. Even the pottery. This is actually Eastern Sigillata, either made, people used to say, oh, it's all made at Antioch, but they're starting to think it might be made in other places as well. But this red slip is found everywhere. This is the Eastern version, but there's like red slip pottery made all over the empire, North Africa and Italy and Gaul, and it's found from Hadrian's Wall down to the border with Parthia. Again, the red slip is like another, I don't know, symbol of the Roman conquest of the world. They also made quite nice lead glazed pottery. This is a horrible photograph, actually. I should probably get a better one. So, since we're on the subject, let's talk a little about Christianity. So this is based on the life of this man, Jesus, or Yeshua, would probably be a better way of saying it, of Nazareth, who clearly didn't have a beard, no matter what they tell you on the television. So they think he's either born before the death of Herod the Great in 3 BC, because there was that thing about Herod having all the babies killed, or during the census of Quirinius in 6 of the Common Era, which is like 9 years later. And so, because there was the census, that's why he went to Bethlehem. It's all very complicated. From 26 to 36, Pontius Pilate was governing Judea, and it's thought that Jesus was crucified in 33 of the Common Era. So Christianity became quite popular to some people. They're monotheists, so they're exempt from emperor worship, which meant they didn't have to pay a tax. As pacifists, if you remember the teachings of Jesus, it was turn the other cheek, not pick up the sword and go and conquer the world. They were exempt from military duty. So this all, of course, made them all very, very popular, and led to things like the persecution of Nero and the death of Peter and Paul at that time, the saints and very important people. And then we had the destruction of the Second Temple, which I talked about. The effect of this is that it destroyed the Christian heartland as it was at that time. And it's possible that Christianity might have been a Jewish sect if the Christians that were in Jerusalem could continue being an important part of the development of Christianity. But they didn't, because Jerusalem was turned into a Roman town with Roman gods and a Roman name. Can't remember what it is. So the Gospels are written within 100 years. The Nag Hammadi library in Egypt, the 2nd century, has some of the earliest examples of it. Oh, and in 313 of the Common Era, Constantine makes Christianity the official religion of the empire. So this is where I'd like to say a bit about Dura Europos, partly because it's a very interesting site, but partly because, as you'll find out, so Dura Europos, this is 256 AD, was destroyed by the Sasanians. But before that happened, they filled up the back behind the city walls with dirt and filled in all the towns. So some people say it's like the Pompeii of the East, because they put all this dirt on top of these buildings. And so these buildings are all preserved up to almost to the roofs in some cases. This is quite interesting. This is the synagogue, which is one of the earliest synagogues and has something that, if you walked in it today, you know anything about synagogues, would say, oh look, it's a synagogue with seats all the way around. This one had lots of paintings. This is the Ark of the Covenant, which just looks like a box in this case. In the Temple of Dagon, god of the Philistines, because they stole it for a bit, if you remember. And here's another building that was preserved. This is another house. You see what I was saying to you about houses in the Middle East with a central courtyard and buildings around. A little ante-room here. You come in, there's a big room. So this is just basically a house, and there are lots of houses just like it. But this one is slightly different. One of which was this room here, which is for bathing in. But it actually has all this Christian iconography in it, and is thought to actually be for baptizing people. It's a baptistry. And, there I go back. This one had these points on the floor here where a stone table had been put, which you often get on early altars, which are designed to look like tables with 4 legs. And so this would be arguably the earliest church in the world. Am I going the wrong way? No. Okay. This is another one. Why I'm showing you this, you'll find out later on. This is a fresco in the Temple of the Palmyrene gods. And you can see the pointy hats of the priests, which is interesting. No, really, it's interesting. You'll find out why later on. And here's another fresco of horse archery, which I have here because I really like horse archery. Sasanians. So the Sasanians are the ones who eventually did destroy Dura Europos. Ardashir I was descended from high priests of Anahita and Astaka, the feminine deity, shall we say, of Zoroastrianism. And in 226 he becomes Shah, Emperor of Emperors. And they were Zoroastrians, often called fire worshippers because they really liked fire. Here's another couple of fire temples. And they really liked horses. Here's another horse archer. And the kings like to really do a lot of sitting with their hands on their sword. Nice sword here, you see. And nice halo. And surrounded by courtiers. This design which we'll see again. And here's again the king, horse archery, that sort of thing. And they built the biggest arch that still exists. This is Parthian pottery, which is just here as a picture. And this is Sasanian pottery, which, you know, we'll be seeing in real life in a couple of weeks. So a bit about Christians. These are Nestorians, and you see how they have interesting hats. So there's a lot of schisms amongst Christians, possibly because it's very complicated. This is the Nicene Creed, which is the thing that a lot of Christians agree on. First came up with it in 325. They agreed on it again in 381, and this is after a lot of schisms. The historians went their own way, and some other people were got rid of. I hope you're not reading it. I'm not going to read it to you. Just relax. And that wasn't the end of the schisms. This is Dir Marmuza again, which is a monastery, so it's actually very relevant now. I can see it's got like a nice church here, the green bit, with all the churchy bits. And here's what it looked like in about 600 of Common Era. And in this church is this beautiful fresco from the late 13th century. And in this beautiful fresco, this is the Last Judgment. And probably way up there would be Jesus judging people. Down here is the devil. There's Peter and Paul. These are the apostles, Adam and Eve, David, Elijah, Solomon, Moses, the Syrian Orthodox bishops and patriarchs. These are from the Syrian Orthodox Church. Bishops and patriarchs, bishops, patriarchs. Patriarchs are like the leaders of the church. And here we have priests and monks and nuns being let into paradise by St. Peter, again of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Whereas on this side, see here we have the scales of the judgment. You have a little devil here pulling it down, a little saint here pulling it down this way. But on this side, you have very bad people who are going to hell. Now, at the top, we have what look like Christians. That's because they are Christians, but they're not Syrian Orthodox Christians. After the Council of Chalcedon, 451, it was divided into non-Chalcedonians, who believed in indivisible human and divine nature of Jesus. And this included the Syrian Orthodox Church, the Armenian Church, the Ethiopian Church, and the Coptic Church. And the Chalcedonians, who were everybody else, like the Orthodox Church in Constantinople and the Catholic Church in Rome. So that's what these are. These are the Malachites, as they called it, the king's Christians, and they're all going straight to hell because they disagree about the nature of Christ. Here's the devil himself. Here are Muslims. Here are some other people. Here on the side are some people with funny hats. I have to wonder if they're Nestorians. It's the devil and a little sub-devil. Here are some other people. It's been suggested they're Jewish. Here are people with pointed hats. I kind of think this may have something to do with pointed hat people in Palmyra. Obviously, pointed hats are people that are wicked and evil. And then you have the round-headed people. I don't know who they are. Down here, we have the people who seem to have like bad things going on. This person likes symbols. He's obviously very loud and annoying. This person has a sword. This person has scales, might be a moneylender. This person seems to be missing things. So obviously these are all very bad people. And at the bottom are people in hell being punished as they should be. So yeah, that shows you the schisms there are in the church, that you could spend all that time and money making that big painting which shows other Christians are going to hell. One of those groups possibly are the Copts, although they're on the same side of the Council of Chalcedon. The Coptic Church. Coptic is also a language which is related to ancient Egyptian. Then there's the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, founded by St. Mark in 42 AD, or the Common Era. I really should decide which way I'm going. And they went their own way after 451 and the Council of Chalcedon. This is the line of St. Mark. This is very St. Marky, a lion with wings. Of course, we keep seeing that. And a halo. See all the halos? This is St. Mark getting sainted. One thing that the Copts were very, very keen on, which they got into the mainstream before they went their own way, was Isis worshippers being sidelined by making Mary the Queen of Heaven. If you've heard anything about Mary, you might have heard the term Queen of Heaven. That was Isis's title. And so basically they were trying to make her the new Isis and stealing all that thunder away from the Isis worshippers. So here you have that traditional, the Father, the Son, and the Mother, and the bird in this case, Trinity thing going on. These are not cherubs. They might think that's what a seraphim looks like. Maybe this is supposed to be cherubim, and this is a seraphim. Equally horrifying. Another thing the Egyptians, the Copts did, was use this ancient Egyptian motif, the Ankh, and they turned it into a cross, symbol of life. Of course, it already looked like a cross, but also took on the symbolism of the cross and became a Christian motif. So now we finally get to Islam. So this is a result of Muhammad, blessings be upon him, who lived from about 572 to 632 of the Common Era. And he was of the Quraysh family, a very important family in his part of the world. And he marries this older widow and becomes her agent, this wealthy woman. And so he becomes a wealthy man and travels his part of the world, meeting lots of people. And he probably traveled to Jerusalem, probably traveled to Iran, and did a lot of traveling. But his home base was Mecca, where the Kaaba was, which was a large black building, which was cubic. That's what Kaaba means, it's the cube. And in it was basically the pantheon of Mecca, with all the gods that were there. And so it was a big trading city. The trade came from southern Arabia, where you have frankincense and myrrh coming in vast amounts up on the camel trains to the Mediterranean region, and lots of other trading going on. So it's very, very important. And so they had gods from everywhere here. But there was one of them, who's the chief god of the Meccan pantheon, who was basically God in the local language, Arabic, Allah, the God. And he, through the angel Gabriel, this may be Gabriel himself right here, declares himself the one true God, the God of Abraham, Noah, Moses, and Jesus. And he was telling that Muhammad, this is Muhammad, was to be actually the last prophet. This, by the way, is his horse with the head of a human. I shall get back to why this is important in another lecture. So, after this was revealed to him, he became locally unpopular. The prophet is never recognized in his hometown, as they say, and left for the town of Yathrib, which later became known as Al-Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the prophet, or mostly just Medina, the city. And that's the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In 630, after building his followership and proselytizing amongst the people, he returns to Mecca. But he dies 2 years later. But he's already established the tenets of the religion and got the backing of the people who will then spread it around the Middle East. So the basic cry of faith is there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. If you say that 3 times to the Muslim standing next to you, you are a Muslim. It's really that simple. In comparison, the Christian statement of faith is this. Remember the Nicene Creed? And so you'll have to understand, Islam is a lot simpler than Christianity. None of this Trinity is one sort of thing, all this going on. It's very simple. There's just this God, right? Muhammad is his prophet. He'll tell you, worship him. Let's move on. And so there are actually 5 pillars of Islam. There is the statement of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his is the Rasul, the prophet of God, messenger. There's the Salat, the prayer towards Mecca 5 times a day, which Muhammad sets out exactly how you're supposed to do it. The Zakat, the almsgiving, which means giving to the poor, but also building some pretty impressive buildings. Fasting during Ramadan, and the pilgrimage to Mecca. There's only the one deity here now, of course. So after that, they pretty much conquer this part of the world. And next week we'll start talking about the pottery. Thank you.